today we're going to do the ecological literacy section. Hold on, just got to get my cursor working. And I'd like to start with this quote because Dr. Elizabeth Sartorius famously said that if we had viewed Earth from space over the last 50,000 years, we would have described humans as a desert-making species, which is quite a terrifying thing. So yesterday we spoke about how our social and economic stability are inseparable from our life-supporting environment, and that we're not something separate to nature at all. We are nature. But that our management has caused us to steadily disconnect from the natural world and destroy our life-supporting environment. So in order to secure our future as a species on this planet, we must dramatically increase biodiversity to restore social, cultural, and economic stability. And as soon as we recognize that, it becomes very clear how crucial it is for us not only to be able to manage the complex circumstances of our decisions, but that we are all ecologically literate and have a very clear understanding of how Earth's different environments function. Because no matter who we are, almost all of our decisions impact the environment, either directly or indirectly, regardless of where we live, who we are, what we do. So today we are all dealing with mass global biodiversity loss, both on land and in our waters. And the terrifying thing is some of the worst examples of biodiversity loss in the world is actually taking place in national parks. And it's mostly in the ones that are found in the vast seasonal rainfall environments of our planet. And that's what we're going to be talking a lot about today. So global biodiversity loss and desertification is without question the greatest threat to our existence, because unless we reverse desertification, climate change will continue even if we stopped our use of fossil fuels completely. So our society has become so intent on using technology to save us that we seem to have forgotten that many past civilizations collapsed already due to desertification centuries before we discovered coal and oil or had today's plastics, machinery, and other biodiversity and chemicals, biodiversity destroying machinery. So we've seen the collapse of societies long before we had all this stuff, which we're blaming today. So while technology can provide benign sources of energy to replace fossil fuels, we've learned that technology cannot provide solutions to our biological problems. Now, desertification is a biological problem and a major contributor to climate change, not a symptom of it, which we will learn about today. And the process of desertification has been gradually destroying the environment over almost 2/3 of the world's landmass for more than 10,000 years. But it's sped up really rapidly in the last century. And because we depend entirely on a healthy environment, we inevitably experience a relative increase in our social and economic instability. And until recently, we didn't know what was causing desertification. We had no idea. But we have recently discovered very exciting new ecological insights, answers, and a biological solution to a problem that has been affecting us for many thousands of years. And that's what we're going to learn about today. So this is part one of this section. Now, our Earth is made up of many different types of environments, from wetland, grassland, woodland, freshwater, tropical forest, marine, tundra, desert, etc. And every different environment on Earth depends on the healthy function of the exact same four ecosystem processes. And those are the water cycle, the mineral cycle, community dynamics, and energy flow. So we're going to go quickly through those. And those four processes drive our entire ecosystem. And together, they are the foundation that sustains all human endeavor, all economies, all civilizations, and all life. And exactly like the inseparable components of our decisions, if we try to manage any one of those four processes separately, we automatically change all of them in some way because they're all just part of one whole. So immediately it shows why it doesn't make sense for us to be focused on and managing in the context of carbon, because carbon is just one inseparable part of nature's complex ecosystem processes. So we have to look at carbon in the full complexity of the whole. We'll start with the water cycle, which I'm sure we all did at school, which is the movement of water from the atmosphere to the soil or oceans through plant and animal life and back to the atmosphere. Now, low biodiversity equals non-effective rainfall. High biodiversity, we have effective rainfall. So it's vital to have an effective water cycle. So what is effective rainfall? It's rain that soaks down into the soil and only leaves it in two ways, either through plants that transpire the moisture back into the atmosphere, or by flowing underground through soil into our rivers, wetlands, springs, and underground reservoirs. Non-effective rainfall is rain which just runs off over the bare soil surface or evaporates directly back into the atmosphere. And both droughts and floods are symptoms of a non-effective water cycle. When rain falls on bare earth, it hits the surface and tends to run off faster than it's able to filter down through the soil into the plant roots and underground aquifers, which is why water supplies decrease and why our wetlands and boreholes are drying up. Without plants and plant litter covering the soil, there's nothing to slow that water as it travels across the ground. And then when it goes downhill, it goes really fast, taking topsoil with it and speeding up in volume and velocity, which leads to flash floods, which fill rivers and dams with silt. And this in turn worsens the likelihood and severity of flash floods year after year as the rivers and dams become shallower and shallower. And then the silt that is carried down rivers is eventually deposited into our oceans, which damages mangroves, estuaries, coral reefs, shelf waters, all the most biodiverse areas of the oceans. And when soil is bare, about 80% of the rain that falls evaporates back into the atmosphere. And even when we have good rains, most of it will either rush over the surface and the rest will evaporate straight back where it came from. So not only is there a flood, but when it subsides, there isn't much water left, which results in drought. Now, the loss of our ability to store water in soils is devastating because soil makes up the greatest available reservoir of non-frozen fresh water on Earth, and it's more than all dams, rivers, and lakes combined. So what we're going to talk about today is it's not how much rain we get that matters, it's how much rain we keep. And the mineral cycle is the same cyclical movement of minerals from soils to plants and animals and back again. And again, low biodiversity results in a non-effective mineral cycle, and high biodiversity results in an effective mineral cycle. And just like the water cycle, minerals and many other nutrients follow a cyclical pattern as they are used and reused by organisms. And a good mineral cycle comes from a very biologically active living soil with good aeration and energy flow. And it provides a wide variety of nutrients that are constantly cycling, but it cannot function effectively in a dying, unhealthy soil. And a good example is on farms, agricultural chemicals may temporarily help produce higher crop yields, but they're destroying soil organisms and they're damaging others that make nutrients available to plants. So those are the knock-on consequences of our reductionist decisions destroying mineral cycles. And then we have biological community dynamics, which is basically the complex relationships between all those living things and which are constantly changing. And as we've spoken a lot about, the more species or the higher biodiversity, the more stable the environment. So again, low biodiversity is unstable, high biodiversity stable. And the more species there are, the more stable it is. So the more complex and diverse communities become, the more stable communities tend to be. And when they lose biodiversity, they're inclined to experience very big changes in both species and numbers. And then we get disease outbreaks in plants, and those happen more frequently, along with increased outbreaks of weeds, insects, birds, or rodents. And we will see dominance by opportunistic plant and animal species that are thriving in bare soil. So again, very important, high biodiversity equals ecological stability. And I love this question for people because I have all sorts of answers. And do you know how many microorganisms there are in just one tablespoonful of healthy soil? 8 billion. And that's more microorganisms than there are people on the planet. So it just shows how living the soil is. And this is important. There is more collaboration between species in nature than competition. And we call this symbiosis, which describes the mutually beneficial relationships that occur among species in any community. And this is such a hard-hitting example because I always hear people talking about ridding invasive or problem plants or animals or whatever. So where problem plants are said to be competing with other plants, closer observation usually shows us that our decisions have created ideal conditions for the unwanted plants and less than ideal conditions for the wanted plants. And in most cases, our management has resulted in bare ground, and the problem plants are just establishing themselves on ground that was once inhabited by the preferred plants. And because they are the only plants growing on the bare ground, we automatically blame them for causing the ground to become bare. So now we're going to go into energy flow, which is the movement of energy from the sun through all those living things. And once again, low biodiversity, low energy flow, high biodiversity, high energy flow. Now, life requires energy. All living organisms depend on the ability of green plants to capture energy from the sun and convert it to a form they can use. And except for a few that live near thermal springs right deep in the ocean. So the fungal networks in plants transfer that energy directly to most other living things as food, or then as food for other animals that other animals eat. So the energy above ground is transferred from plants to fish, birds, insects, reptiles, and mammals. I always put including humans because we tend to exclude ourselves from mammals, to the predators, including us, who eat those animals, to further predators, who eat those animals, and then to scavengers, and finally decay. And below ground, the energy is transferred from plants to decomposers like beetles, termites, worms, fungi, bacteria, and other tiny little microorganisms, billions of them. So it's very important to know and understand how energy is working as it moves through our ecosystem and how to increase its availability, because all life depends on the plant's ability to convert sun's energy into edible forms. And now we're going to go into the different climates on our Earth, which we call the brittleness scale. And this is the new knowledge that's been discovered. Is for centuries we have believed that all the different environments on our Earth respond in the same manner to the same influences, but we now know that they don't. Within Earth's giant ecosystem are different climates, which go on a scale from non-brittle, which is humid, to very brittle, which is arid. So on the brittleness scale, a rainforest would be a 1 and a desert would be a 10 at the two extremes of that scale. And because the two extremes of non-brittle and brittle environments show a clear association to total rainfall, we always believed that desertification has something to do with low rainfall. But we now know that desertification has nothing to do with the amount of rain that an area gets. It's the brittleness of an area that determines if an environment is at risk of man-made desertification or not. And so it all depends on how rain and moisture is distributed throughout the year and on how quickly dead vegetation rots or breaks down. So we'll have a look at non-brittle environments first. So a non-brittle environment is moist or humid all year round. They are constantly humid and have a very high level of moisture in the air. And the moisture is distributed evenly in these environments throughout the year. They make up about 1/3 of our planet's landmass, which are the green parts, which can be seen on this map. They're constantly humid with a high level of moisture in the air and soil. Moisture is distributed evenly. And because it's moist all year, the vegetation can rot or break down quickly and constantly. So the dead grass and leaves are soft and moist. And due to the moisture, a mass of vegetation is produced throughout the year. There's no period of dormancy. So the plants also die in these environments throughout the year, but they decompose quickly due to the high numbers of insects and microorganisms. And the microorganisms can remain constantly active because they're activated by moisture. So in a non-brittle environment, it's hard to create bare ground because nature covers it up so quickly. Now we'll look at brittle environments. A brittle environment is described as arid because it has a short rainy season followed by a long dry season. And they make up about 2/3 of our planet's landmass, which are in the red lines there. And those are becoming deserts rapidly. Now, they have a short rainy season and a long dry season, and moisture is therefore not evenly distributed throughout the year. So the vegetation cannot break down all year round. When our rains stop, humidity drops and the soil dries out, and most of the above ground vegetation will die, but has to decompose biologically before the next rainy season. And due to the lack of moisture, the insect and microorganism activity is greatly reduced and they go into dormancy because it's dry. And then during the rainy season, the vegetation and microorganism populations build up. So we'll go back into that just now on the brittle environments. So deserts have been forming for thousands of years, and desertification is not a new problem. And I'm referring to man-made deserts because they have always been natural or true deserts, which occur in regions of little to no rainfall. But these are not the regions we're referring to when we're talking about desertification. It's a man-made desertification. And it's the process of an environment turning to desert because human decisions and management practices have caused the available rainfall to become less and less effective. And over millennia, man-made deserts have been expanding into grasslands and savannas, which has resulted in the collapse of many ancient civilizations in the past. And I put this in because it's so interesting. Libya was described in the 5th century as having deep black soils and abundant wildlife, but it is now part of the Sahara Desert. And that's a photo of Libya now. Desertification caused by humans happens when land becomes increasingly dry, despite no change in the rainfall patterns. Rivers that once flowed all year round begin to flow only during periods of heavy rainfall and quickly dry up again. And silt and eroded soil begin to fill dams and rivers until they're very, very shallow and no longer capable of storing the water, which causes those flash floods. Rainfall is no longer effective and cannot filter down to replenish underground aquifers, and the water tables drop. Crop yields shrink, grass and forage for animals, both wild and domestic, become increasingly sparse. As a result, the people who make their living from the land become impoverished. Poverty leads to social breakdown, violence, and war as people start to compete for scarcer and scarcer resources and access to land and water. The affected people will abandon the land that can't support them and move to cities or other countries, causing many more social and economic problems. And desertification has already led to the collapse of many individual civilizations, but today it threatens us globally. Global desertification is culminating in climate change. And do you remember yesterday we spoke about the 1 square meter of bare soil? And if you took the temperature of 1 square meter of bare soil, it'd be much colder at dawn and much hotter at midday than the same piece of ground if it was covered with plant litter. So by exposing soil, we change the microclimate. And now, if you imagine that at scale on 2/3 of the world's land surface, it means we have drastically changed the macroclimate. So what causes land to turn to desert? We've never done anything about reversing desertification, even though it began to happen as long as 10,000 years ago. Because until relatively recently, we simply didn't understand what was causing the desertification of brittle environments, and we didn't know why the process had accelerated in the last century. We had completely missed the fact that in brittle or seasonally arid environments of the world, there was something else keeping everything healthy. Nature had a very powerful ecological influence keeping things in balance, because there should always be vegetation or plant litter covering the soil in brittle environments. So how was that vegetation broken down every year and over millions and millions of years in the past? Herding animals. Millions of them. And can you work out what was making sure those huge herds were kept moving and behaving naturally? They're predators. In brittle environments, soils, plants, and animals exist in a symbiotic relationship with each other and rely on each other for survival. Without the correct timing and impact of herding herbivores, Earth's brittle environments will continue to decline and desertification will continue unabated. So why are herding animals vital to the health of the land in brittle environments? What happens is in brittle environments, the vegetation grows and microorganism populations build up during the rainy months. And then after the rains stop, the humidity drops, the soil dries out, and most of the above ground vegetation will die. Only the plants, tree trunks, branches of trees, and the bases of perennial grass plants will stay alive. And the insect and microorganism activity is reduced as they start to go into dormancy for that dry period. But remember, all that vegetation has to break down biologically before the next rainy or growing season. So if grass plants remain standing upright during the dry season, what happens? The dead grass leaves block the sun's ability to supply solar energy to the living growth points of the plants right at the base at ground level, which damages or kills them. Because instead of rapid biological decay, the breakdown of dead vegetation turns to slow chemical oxidation by sunlight. And without solar energy at the bases, those plants will begin to oxidize and die. And I'm sure you've all seen grass that looks like this before. It's just that gray and lifeless grass that you see, what we see here in Africa all the time. And that is the slow chemical breakdown that results in those dead grasses, and they smother other plants, killing them, which leaves the soil bare and exposed. And to prevent that from happening, humans began to use fire to burn the grasslands to clear them after rainy seasons. But burning is just rapid chemical oxidation. Burning kills grass plants outright and leaves the soil bare and exposed. Vegetation in brittle environments has to break down biologically, not chemically. So what is the biological breakdown of plant material? It's the gradual natural decomposition of dead organic matter by the microorganisms, which gain their energy and nutrients by breaking down the dead remains of vegetation into simpler organic and inorganic matter. So to biologically break down all that vegetation that grows during the rainy season, it needs trillions of microorganisms, bacteria, fungi, beetles, insects, and worms to break it down during that long dry season. And what is needed to activate microorganisms? Moisture. So where would these microorganisms find the moisture they need during those really long dry months? The moisture needed to activate the microorganisms during the long dry seasons is found in the moist digestive tract of millions of herding animals. It's in their dung and urine. And now we'll talk about the role of herding animals in brittle environments. So the presence of large herds is absolutely vital because first, they consume plant material while it's still green and growing, and they continue to consume it long after that growth has stopped. And then they trample what they don't eat into the ground, spreading dung and urinating on it as they go, which forms a perfect protective fertilized mulch over the soil. And I just did a series of photos with the process. So you've got your growing season, then it starts to dry out, the animals come along, they trample it down. And these are all photos I took, except for this one, of that process happening. Now, insects and microorganisms need the moisture to enable them to continue to be active and break down plant material during the dry season and before the next rains. So in brittle environments, the moisture needed to activate microorganisms is only found in the moist digestive tracts of millions and millions of herding animals. With the moisture they need being provided by herding animals, they can remain active right through the dry or non-growing season. The herds reduce the large volume of plant material they consume to dung, and the moisture in the dung and urine keeps the insects and microorganisms active, so they can continue to break down that throughout the dry season. With the dead grass stems trampled down flat, the sun's energy is no longer blocked and it can reach the growth points of the plants and the new shoots begin to grow. So this is a photo I took of that long before the rain started. It starts to go green and the new shoots come up. And the soil is mulched and ready to catch rain, which then filters down through the soil and the plant's roots. Now we'll look at the predator-prey connection to the health of the land. So why are predators so important when it comes to the correct behavior and impact of the herding animals and the health of brittle environments? Well, how do herding animals keep themselves safe from predators? They keep bunched together in groups. And the bigger the herd, the safer the individual. The presence of predators keeps the herds bunched together for safety, and they're moving. And the bunched herds graze, trample, and fertilize vegetation while aerating the soil with their hooves. And they don't overgraze plants because as they graze, the animals are spreading dung and urinating, ensuring that the herd is constantly on the move as they find fresh, clean ground. Now, herding animals have very different behavior patterns, and the effects of how their different behaviors influence what happens to the environment are often delayed. And different behavior patterns produce different effects. So the herd behavior when feeding is that they tend to spread out or they don't go too far for fear of predation. And they walk gently and slowly, placing their hooves beside the coarse plants and not on top of them. They place all their weight on their hooves and they compact the soil below, but they don't really disturb the soil surface. And they have very little impact on the plants and soil other than removal of forage and soil compaction. But once feeding is over or when the predators are around, herds behave completely differently. So this is herd behavior when predators are actually hunting. They bunch close together for safety, and in their excitement, they're churning up dust. And while huddled in herds, they step all over the place. The coarse plants that don't normally get trampled down or grazed get trampled down, which provides cover for the soil surface. And the hooves of the milling animals leave the soil chipped and broken. So a relaxed grazing herd will keep off steep cutting edges of gullies, while a clustered or bunched herd will beat down the edges. Now, next time you look at a sharp riverbank, think of this. This creates a more gradual slope, which can support and hold vegetation. So basically, herds and their predators are designed to do on a huge scale exactly what any gardener would do to get seeds to grow. First, they loosen the sealed soil surface with the impact of their hooves. Then they bury the seed slightly and compact the soil around the seed. And then they cover the surface with a fertilized mulch. And overgrazing is caused by a factor of time, not animal type or numbers. That is so important. Overgrazing is caused by a factor of time and not animal type or numbers, which makes the correct timing and impact absolutely critical. If a herd stays too long, plants get overgrazed. But if the herds don't bunch up together or don't stay in one area long enough, the soil surface doesn't get loosened or mulched enough. So the timing is perfected by the predators, who keep the herds bunched together, needing to move off their own dung and urine, which is just incredible coevolution with vegetation, soil, and all that life, ensuring the health and survival of the whole. And with that, we go into effective versus non-effective rainfall. On the left is a photo that I took on the same day of holistically managed land using these methods that you'll learn today. And on the right is 30 k's away in a national park. So this is an interesting little thing, because if we have 1 mil of rainfall on 1 square meter of ground, it's equal to 1 liter of water. So if we have 1 mil of rainfall falling on 1 hectare, that's 10,000 liters of water. Now, what happens when rainfall is effective? When biodiversity is high and rainfall is effective, most of the water will sink down into the soil through plant roots and then travel underground to our rivers. And what doesn't sink down will be absorbed into the plants, and eventually it'll transpire back into the atmosphere through their leaves. Now, if we had effective rainfall of just 1 mil countrywide on an area of a small country of around 40 million hectares, which is about, I think it was the size of Zimbabwe that I was going on, that would mean that almost 400 billion liters of water would be stored in our underground water systems and filtered through the soil and roots to wetlands, lakes, rivers, oceans, boreholes, etc. Isn't that crazy? And what happens when rainfall is not effective? When biodiversity is low and the ground is bare, dry, and hard, rainfall can no longer be effective. And we've all seen this. The water will rush over the surface, taking topsoil, depositing silt in dams, rivers, and oceans. And the underground water reservoirs cannot be replenished, and most of the water will quickly be lost. Now, remember that when soil is bare, we lose about 80% of the water to evaporation. Now, our decisions have severely damaged water cycles, which results in non-effective rainfall on most of the planet's landmass. And this is what our decisions have done. They've severely damaged water cycles, resulting in non-effective rainfall on about 2/3 of our planet's land. Boreholes dry up, rivers silt up and stop flowing, dams fill with silt, wetlands dry up, floods increase, droughts increase, and wildfires increase. Our decisions have upset nature's balance. So we have wiped out countless numbers and species of herding animals, those herding animals that keep everything healthy in brittle environments. In the Americas, New Zealand, Australia, Europe, and Africa, over 50% of the genera, along with many species of herding, grazing animals, have been wiped out over the last few thousand years. And this is the most terrifying photo. It's a photo of bison skulls. I'm sure you've seen it along the way. In the USA alone, over 40 species of herding grazing animals have been wiped out over the last few thousand years. And the bison were just a remnant of what once was. And this is a photo of an elephant herd in Tsavo in the 1960s. Just incredible how many animals there were in these herds. And with the newfound advantages of fire, language, organization, and weapons, combined with our inherited reductionist decision-making process, we'd begun to drastically change the environment around us. Humans were changing everything. So there were now too few herding animals left to graze on and trigger the replenishment of grasses, legumes, broadleaf, and other plants, which resulted in vegetation starting to oxidize and die without the natural movement of those herds and their predators. And what we did is we tried to replace the herds with fire. Now, early humans started to use fire to clear that dead vegetation, which the herds did naturally, and bring on a new flush of grass to attract their prey. But no fire lit by a human is natural, and this type of frequent and unnatural burning began to expose soil in a way that made it very easily carried away by rain and wind. And the world had never known such frequent and vast fires. And in the millennia that followed, huge man-made deserts began to form and spread. And we blame everything but ourselves. The early humans began to blame desertification on livestock, and they firmly believed that livestock numbers were too high, resulting in overgrazing grasslands, which led to desertification. And I'm going to go into a break on this point because it's so hard-hitting. This belief was so firmly held that it assumed scientific validity, and it has remained the explanation for desertification for more than 200 years. So on that note, if everybody's happy, we're going to go into a 10-minute break. Is that okay, Carl? Is Carl there?
Yeah, I think it's fine. I think it's fine, Sarah.
Okay. So we'll go into 10 minutes break and then we'll start off from that point. Carl, will you tell me when the 10 minutes is up? I didn't time it.
Hi, my internet dropped slightly. What time? I can't remember when you started. I think it was very soon.
Yeah. No, so it's another 2 minutes. We
Okay.
can start at 50.
Thanks, Pete.
Sorry, thanks, Peter. Is my screen sharing working?
Yep, all good.
Okay, cool. Should I go ahead?
Sure.
Okay. So I left us with this scary thing that the belief that livestock was causing desertification was so firmly held that it assumed scientific validity, even though it wasn't proven, and has remained the explanation for desertification for more than 200 years. And nobody has questioned that explanation for desertification, or nobody questioned it until recently. And as we began to examine these ancient beliefs, we discovered that in any environment, the overgrazing and damage from trampling has very, very little to do with the number or type of animals. It all depends on the amount of time that plants and soils are exposed to the animals. And outside of national parks, we blame livestock. Inside national parks, we blame elephants. And in national parks and brittle environments where there are no elephants to blame, those have caused confusion and left people unsure about what to blame, but we generally blame herding animals for causing desertification. But animals are not the cause of the problem. Their unnatural behavior is a symptom. We can only blame ourselves. So over millennia, our management and our decisions have resulted in increasingly unnatural movement and impact of both wildlife and livestock. And our decisions have upset the balance between herding animals and their predators. And we've been causing too many animals to behave unnaturally for centuries. And it's through our mistakes that we find answers. And the following is an example of mass environmental, social, and economic disaster caused by just one reductionist decision. Now, this terrible mistake is also the reason these new management and ecological insights you are learning about right now were discovered. Now, in Zimbabwe in the 1950s, there were beautiful, biodiverse, wild areas being set aside for future national parks. And in order to preserve wildlife, the Zimbabwean government, or Rhodesian government, decided to remove the people who had lived with the wildlife in those areas for centuries. So this policy was implemented, and they removed the native people, unaware of the devastating knock-on ripple effect that those actions would set off across entire areas. Their actions were decided, as we spoke about yesterday, in the simple but incomplete context of wanting to address the environmental problem of protecting the wildlife. And they did achieve their short-term objective of removing the people from their native lands. And they had job done, and the decision makers moved on with no thought to the invisible chain reaction that their actions had set in motion across the entire environment. And whenever a single species in a whole is added or subtracted, the entire whole changes. So their decision had set off a catastrophic chain reaction across that environment. Now, with their main predator gone, huge herds of elephants no longer had to keep bunched together and on the move for safety. They could spread out, they could linger as long as they wanted, wherever they wanted. They had stopped moving and behaving naturally. And this resulted in prolonged, unnatural, and damaging overgrazing and trampling of that vegetation. And then they stayed away from the less favorable areas, which resulted in damaging overrest of that vegetation. Now, elephants are predominantly grazers, and as the grasses, legumes, broadleaf, and other vegetation started to die off, they had no choice but to browse. And as the damage increased, they had to browse more and more trees in an attempt to get the nutrients they needed. And an adult elephant needs about an average of 150 kgs of food a day. So what did people do? They started blaming the elephants for causing damage to the environment and to the trees. So one reductionist decision had resulted in devastating consequences, the sudden and completely unnatural behavior of thousands and thousands of elephants, along with loads of other species of herding and other animals. And over the next few years, that unnatural behavior of huge herds of elephants caused everything in those environments to suffer drastic change and damage. But nobody sees the unnatural behavior of elephants as a symptom of our decisions or our management. All people see are elephants damaging the environment. So they blamed the environmental damage on the elephants, saying there were too many of them. And they moved on. But the damage was not being caused by too many elephants. The damage had been caused by the decision to remove an apex predator, which resulted in the devastating consequences of too many elephants behaving unnaturally. But because the long-term consequences and damage are gradual and invisible to the decision makers, nobody connected the destruction to the management. And the damage was blamed on the elephants, and then, using the same decision-making process that caused the problem in the first place, they then made a new decision in the incomplete context of that new problem, of addressing the new environmental problem of too many elephants. So Allan, my father, was the lead ecologist at the time, and he was tasked by the government to do the research. And his advice and findings were based on his beliefs from what he'd been taught at university, that too many animals cause damage. And the government and other ecologists all agreed, and they approved his findings. And they made a policy to cull elephants to reduce their numbers. So another reductionist decision, this time to address the symptom of the original reductionist decision. And over the next few decades, over 40,000 elephants were culled. And if you speak to my father, he still cries about this when he speaks about it. Once again, the short-term objective had been met. The elephant numbers were lowered based on the thinking that the environment could now recover. Job done, and they moved on absolutely believing that they had made the right decision because that's what they'd been taught. But all they had done was push the domino again. And over the next few years, the biodiversity loss increased drastically, and the land degradation became far worse, not better. And Allan continued to observe those areas very closely after the cull, and he began to see that the desertification and biodiversity loss was increasing even without the elephants. And it was then that it dawned on him that he had made the biggest, most absolutely horrific mistake of his life. And he realized it wasn't the elephants that were causing the problem. Herds of elephants behaving naturally are absolutely crucial to the health of their environment. It was us. And then what my father did is he tried to tell the other people involved that they had been wrong and they'd made a huge mistake. He tried to get the government and other ecologists to listen to him, but nobody would. And it's explained in the start of my workbook. As soon as we believe or think we know something to be true, our minds become blocked to hearing anything else, and we are almost incapable of seeing or accepting any new knowledge if it goes against our beliefs. And this problem gets far worse when our professional egos become tied to those beliefs. And my dad wrote this after that call. He said, as scientists, we are first and foremost humans, and like all humans, we tend to see what we believe rather than believe what we see. As I learned myself, when we believe something deeply for whatever reason, it is easy to see evidence that supports our belief, while any evidence not supporting what we believe becomes virtually invisible. So he believed that elephants were causing the damage. He could prove that because their unnatural behavior was, but that was a symptom of something else. And nobody else would listen or admit it had been a mistake because they believed what they'd been taught, that the land degradation was caused by too many elephants. And these are some of the headlines that we have around the world to this day. And that happened 50, 60, 70 years ago. And this, everybody says how wonderful Boswell is because he does these circus tricks in Mana, but it's desperation. An adult elephant bull desperately tries to reach food high up in the trees as there is no vegetation left on the ground for him to eat, and the browse line is as high as an adult bull elephant standing on his back legs, which is terrifying. And tragically, to this day, most people believe and are still being taught that large herding animals like cattle and elephants are to blame for causing damage to land. We're taught that we can only prevent destructive trampling and overgrazing of plants by keeping animal numbers low and scattering them widely. These beliefs, combined with an outdated management process, are resulting in more and more devastating decisions like the culling, translocating, and sterilization of elephants and other wildlife. This was a recent headline I found. Experts state that when it comes to managing elephant populations, the options are limited to 3: culling, translocation, birth control. And it's a nice headline with no mention of our management actually needing to change, and we wouldn't have to do any of those things that are so cruel. So how long will we continue to blame nature for our mistakes and ignore our management? It's time to change old beliefs. The belief that all land should be rested or left undisturbed in order to reverse its deterioration has been proven completely wrong. High numbers of herding animals, concentrated and moving as they once did naturally in the presence of predators, are absolutely vital to the health of the same lands we once believed they destroyed. So now we're going to go on to our management tools. These are our environmental management tools. Throughout most of history, ever since we learned how to control fire, did you know that we've only ever had 3 tools to manage our environment? just try to think in advance what they are. We have technology in many forms, from axes, shovels, chemicals, pesticides, tractors, etc. We've had fire. And then the third tool we have is rest, or conservation, or rewilding, as we call it today. So while rest is not physically an actual tool, the concept of rest is widely used as a tool to manage our environment. So those are our three tools: technology, fire, and rest. And let's just go into technology a little bit, which is the first and most used tool. So we've become so obsessed with technology that we believe there are technological solutions to everything, even when it comes to solving biological problems, like growing meat in labs. We have developed an unnatural obsession with trying to dominate and control nature with technology. But we have to understand and respect that while technology has its benefits, we will never, ever control nature. So we are never going to solve nature's complex biological problems with the use of technology. We will only solve technological problems using biological solutions. Yet, for thousands of years, our fixation with technology has caused us to turn away from finding biological answers in favor of technological solutions. Our pursuit of technological triumph often has terrible, terrible consequences on the ecosystem that sustains us all. Now, the long-term effects of using technology can sometimes be delayed by days or even years. And the consequences may only be felt far from the site of use, where we can't connect the damage to its source. And most of our hazardous technological inventions and interventions have existed for less than a century. And these quick, unnatural fixes, we'll see, will often achieve immediately dramatic and profitable results, but they usually prove very, very costly in the long term. As we spoke about yesterday, we meet short-term objectives at long-term expense. So if our mindset continues to be one of competition, then we will see competition everywhere, and we make decisions for that reason. But as soon as we change management and we begin to think in terms of functioning wholes, collaboration, connection, and synergy, we will think of and manage our problems completely differently. And we need this shift in our mindset from the reductionist, conventional one of how can we eradicate rats, locusts, weeds, invasive species, etc., and instead start thinking, how can we increase the entire biological community to the point where the rats, locusts, weeds, invasive plants contribute to the stability of the environment and cease to be a problem? And experts seldom ask whether we are dealing with the cause of a problem or a symptom. And in America, the government spends over $1 billion a year on poisoning weeds. And they've been doing that for over 40 years. And they've never eradicated a single weed. In fact, they've increased them. So what they have done is poison the soil and waters, decrease biodiversity, and expand the problem. Yet they carry on doing the same thing every year without question. Now, governments around the world spend billions and billions and billions of dollars each year trying to eradicate invasive species and get rid of things, which just creates more and more ideal conditions for those species to thrive, which is why they just keep increasing year after year. So we're like on a hamster wheel. And now we can see that using quick technological fixes can result in short-term objectives being met, but will also usually cause devastating long-term damage later on. And we're addicted to technological solutions. And we've now simplified soil communities and structures so much that just like a drug addict's worn-out body, our land and our problems demand even harsher stimulation to produce the same high. And of course, we can never hope to feed future generations without technology, but we can learn to apply it in ways that don't become pathological, they don't become damaging and addictive. So by using a holistic context to guide our decisions, we will quickly reveal the quick fixes, which are likely to fail in the long term, among technological remedies. And we can steer clear of technologies that provide immediate gratification at long-term expense in favor of those that provide lasting gain. So the next tool we're going to look at is fire. Now, fire has existed for billions of years, but the use of fire as a tool by humans for modifying our environment is relatively recent. And for 99% of our existence, we had no other tool but fire to reshape entire landscapes. So our misuse of fire has transformed entire continents, but to this day, it remains the only tool accepted by institutions for use in our management of most of Earth's land areas. Now, no fire lit by a human is natural. But for about 60,000 years, we've been trying to replace the role of herding animals in brittle environments with the tool of fire to clear the dead vegetation each year. And we've been burning for so many years that we've lost most of the animal-dependent vegetation, so nutrient-rich vegetation, and we've replaced it with fire-dependent plants, which means the vegetation left for animals has a much lower nutrient content. And according to pollen records, before the arrival of humans, most of Australia was covered with animal-dependent vegetation, which is now dominated by fire-dependent vegetation. And as we all know, today, huge areas of the earth are dominated by fire-dependent plants due to frequent burning, which just turns those environments into bigger and bigger furnaces every year. And we defend the use of fire, and people say, we know how to use it to manage the environment. Of course, people know how to use it. It was the only tool we had for millennia. But this is so important. It doesn't make it the right tool. Whether to use fire or any other tool only becomes clear when our actions are determined by a broad context. Now, land managers will look at the current state of the 4 ecosystem processes, and their actions will be based on what's desired in their own holistic context. And now we'll go into rest, which has been the most misunderstood tool by far. Now, the concept of rest or conservation is a more recent management tool than fire and technology. So today, resting an environment, everybody calls it rewilding. And we've always considered rest as natural and therefore beneficial everywhere, until we realized that brittle and non-brittle environments react to rest in very, very different ways. So when humans first settled in permanent villages, they drove wild herds from the surrounding areas, and with their advancing tools and skills, they had the ability to kill many, many, many animals at once. And these reductionist decisions unintentionally started to subject those lands to rest. But we now know that the brittle environments of the world will turn to desert and die without the correct timing and impact of herds. So over-resting of land occurs when there is either inadequate or infrequent trampling by animals. So for centuries, people have been so focused on the overgrazing of plants that it's caused us to overlook the problem of over-resting the land which the plants depend on. But both overgrazing and over-resting of brittle environments leads to desertification. So partial rest occurs when large herds of bunched and grazing animals are no longer threatened and their behavior changes. The animals scatter more, and because they're moving slowly, they're seldom trampling old plants or breaking the soil surface. And in the absence of pack hunting predators, animals will scatter while grazing, and in this scenario, they barely trample any vegetation, again leaving the soil uncovered between plants. And in some cases, animals will overgraze plants by staying too long in one place, or they return to it too soon before the grazed plants have had enough time to recover. So it's all a delicate balance, basically. So our management has resulted in an imbalance, either grazing too frequently or trampling in some areas and not enough in others. And it doesn't matter whether they're wild or domestic, the same thing is happening. So both wild herds and livestock can overgraze plants if the animals are not moving naturally. And with wildlife, this happens because they're no longer subject to predation, as we learned earlier, or there may be fences blocking their migrations. And in the case of livestock, overgrazing happens because their movement is being restricted by herders or fences who protect them from predators, like I said, or fencing keeps them contained in one area. All of this prevents them from behaving naturally. So today, people intentionally rest or rewild land in the hope that it will recover from the effects of fire, overgrazing, or overtrampling. But this practice is devastating for brittle environments, but it's beneficial in non-brittle environments. So the correct animal timing and impact is absolutely crucial to restoring biodiversity and balance in brittle environments. So let's look at the effects of rest on the 4 ecosystem processes in brittle or arid environments. So the water and mineral cycles become less and less effective. Community dynamics decline and instability ensues. And the energy flow in brittle environments declines a lot. So this is so important. In brittle environments, rest, partial or total, is extremely damaging to biodiversity and soil cover. Now let's look at the effects of using rest as a tool on the 4 ecosystem processes in non-brittle or humid environments. So in humid environments, water and mineral cycles build up and maintain high levels of effectiveness when they're rested. The community dynamics develop to very high levels of diversity and stability, and energy flow reaches a high level. So in non-brittle environments, rest is the most powerful tool we have to help restore or maintain biodiversity and soil cover. So in one instant, rest is devastating, and in human environments, it's the most powerful tool we have. And at the midpoint on the brittleness scale, rest shifts from being increasingly positive to increasingly negative in terms of maintaining soil cover, energy flow, and vegetation. So it becomes very important to check where you are. So some of the greatest environmental tragedies in history have resulted from people assuming that all environments can be rewilded and respond the same way to rest. Now, over-resting land is the leading cause of desertification, which will never be solved with technology. So only the correct timing and impact of grazing animals can help us reverse it. So now we have to talk about a new tool. We believe that we have many options when it comes to reversing the loss of biodiversity and desertification in order to secure our future. But with all the creativity, money, and labor in the world, there's almost nothing we can do without using a tool because we're a tool-using animal. In today's world, nearly everything we do involves using some form of technology. And we are not going to be able to stop the biodiversity loss of brittle environments without using some form of land management tool. Now, I want you to answer all of this in your head as we go along. We know we can't solve the biological problem of global desertification using technology. We know that using fire as a tool to replace the role of herding animals doesn't work, because it causes rapid chemical breakdown, further deterioration, and an increase in fire-dependent vegetation. We know that in non-brittle environments and in the world's oceans, if we leave things alone to rest or rewild, biodiversity will recover. And we now know that rest of brittle environments will cause further deterioration because the health of those environments depends on a symbiotic relationship between vegetation, herding animals, and their predators. So Can the tool of technology, fire, or the concept of rest help us to successfully regenerate the world's brittle environments? No. We have never had a biological tool or solution to help us regenerate land in brittle environments until now. So let's look at our new biological land management tool. It's animal impact and grazing. If we can simulate the behavior of wild herds under threat of predation, we can use livestock as a tool in habitat regeneration. But we've been so busy blaming livestock for causing desertification that we didn't even recognize them as a potential biological tool until very recently. And we'd already had 10,000 years of very knowledgeable pastoralists bunching and moving their herds of animals, but their decisions resulted in the incorrect timing and impact of those animals, which caused the great man-made deserts of the world. But livestock have never been the problem. The problem has always been how they are managed. And we've only recently discovered how to successfully use herding animals, both wild and domestic, as a tool to once again create the impact and disturbance necessary to maintain the health of brittle environments. But how do we do this without overgrazing plants? We now know that our management will impact complex circumstances and that we cannot just manage land and livestock alone. There is far more involved than systematically bunching and herding animals. So no management or grazing system can work when we are managing nature's social, economic, and environmental complexity, because as we discussed yesterday, nature is anything but predictable or systematic. And many, many grazing systems have been derived from this work. I just wrote down a few: rotational grazing, adaptive multi-paddock grazing, all ultra high density grazing. And these systems are being used by livestock farmers around the world today. And while some of those grazing systems appear to work well in non-brittle environments, in brittle environments, they may work for a while, but the shortcomings of those simplified systems and systematic planning soon become apparent. So we need to manage livestock in a way that mimics the complexity of nature. So instead of a system, we'd have to use a proactive, adaptable planning process that allows us to account for and flow with nature's complexity. And Allan began studying other professions when he was trying to figure this all out to see if anybody had ever tackled this kind of complexity before. And he found what was needed to address the livestock part of the whole management issue at Sandhurst, which is Britain's military academy. And he found they had developed practical military planning techniques for handling rapidly changing situations, which he found he could adapt to suit to our own complex, unpredictable biological needs when planning the movements of livestock. So using this knowledge, he came up with a planning process that enables us to manage livestock in a way that really mimics nature. And this new biological tool is being used to regenerate land all over the world, from small farms to vast pastoral regions. That's a photo I took of us replanning the movement of the livestock after a terrible fire, which you can't predict. And he called it holistic plan grazing. And it's a planning process, not system. It's a process to help land managers just make sure that their decisions will account for and flow with all the unpredictable complexities involved when planning the movements of their herds. So, and when we're doing this, what we spoke about, the difference in wild herd behavior when a herd is relaxed and grazing compared to its behavior when predators are hunting, is so significant that when we use this process, land managers break things down into two tools. So you have to have the animal impact and grazing and the two different types of impact that these animals will have naturally. And this biological tool is all about increasing biodiversity and improving environmental health for all life, wildlife and people. And when planning the management of livestock's movements, everything is considered and balanced that you can possibly think of. People, finances, and nature, from social and financial considerations to the wildlife movements and breeding seasons of the area. We'll look at seasons, ecosystem processes, livestock health, wildlife needs, human needs, the actual behavior of the herd, the locations of ground nesting birds, breeding periods, whether other wildlife come through and do half the job, other land uses, crops, forestry, hunting, tourism, etc. So all of these things are taken into consideration when planning where the herd is going to be. And they're, like I just said, they all affect where and when the livestock can be at any given time. And in areas where there are predators, like where we are, lions, etc., they're kept safe overnight in predator-friendly bomas or kraals. So holistic planned grazing helps ensure that the livestock are in the right place at the right time and with the right behavior. And whether or not to use the tool of livestock, just like any other tool, will be determined by the holistic context, establishing where the environment lies on the brittleness scale and the current state of your 4 ecosystem processes. And by using the biological tool of herding animals to help us, we can begin to reverse desertification and restore the biodiversity of the world's brittle environments. We can start to bring wildlife populations back to the numbers they once were so that they can one day once again do the job of keeping everything in those environments healthy. And with desertification advancing, there's obviously increasing conflict between people and wildlife over resources. So when you develop a holistic context, it immediately gives value to wildlife because increasing biodiversity becomes paramount. And when we're running a management herd amongst wildlife, the livestock owners are taught to use these predator-friendly kraals to keep their animals safe at night. And doing this is greatly reducing pressure on both the humans and the wildlife and the livestock. So let's look at some of the results. I'm not sure how they'll come out on the screen of land managers using the biological tool of livestock. So this is land in South Africa. I don't know, can you see my cursor? This is land in the Karoo in South Africa where we've used the tool of livestock and this has been rested. This is somebody's land in America, in the USA. This is the guy using his livestock and this is his neighbor's land, just a few meters up the river. And this is at our concession in Victoria Falls. It was a control point photo. I think it was 3 years difference between that using the tool of livestock. And these are photos I took on the same day during the rainy season. And all of these areas are within 40 Ks of each other. So this one I took in a communal land. And then I drove about 20 Ks to a national park. And then this is Africa Center for Holistic Management, where we've regenerated it. And you can see the difference. That is the same day, same rainfall, same everything, wildlife, etc., just using the tool of livestock. And then this was the same day. This is this river and this river during the dry season. So you can see the difference. It's immense. And then this is really exciting. We took this last October, so end of a very long dry season near Vic Falls, right next door to Wangi National Park. And we now have a new wetland that's appeared and the elephants have formed like this natural spring back here where the water is coming out of the ground. And we've got fish, geese, elephants, buffalo, everything. My son loves catching fish in here. And yeah, it's very, very exciting to see. And this is when everybody in Wangi next door is drilling boreholes and blaming elephants. And we have hundreds of elephants on here at any given time. So what have we learned? Hopefully. We are the only species on Earth whose management has disconnected us from the natural world. And so far, this has led to absolute disaster for all species, including ourselves. We have a responsibility to collectively focus on and take care of the health of the elephant as a whole. So we urgently need to adapt and adjust our management at both an individual and organizational level in order to reconnect ourselves to our life-supporting habitat and to every other species of plant and animal who share this planet with us. And this is it, really. We literally get to decide our future. Thank you. Is anybody still there?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for this. It was so insightful.
Thank you. Let me
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, guys. Okay, I'll stop sharing. Hold on.
Do you have time for some questions and comments from the audience?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, sure. So if anyone has a question or comments, they can just, I think now is the right time. And thanks, Sarah, for a very insightful talk and thought working.
Thanks, Thabang. I've enjoyed it.
Great.
I like teaching in person first. For anyone that's interested, like I said, I've written this workbook which has all of this, but it also, like everything we learned yesterday and today, it has in it, with all you can see the same stuff. It's got questions where you can fill it in, and it's also got quite a few practical real life situations and examples, so that different people from different walks of life can relate to it. I've tried to include everyone from farmers, wildlife, people living in cities, everybody, so that they can just connect to it and understand it. So everything is in that workbook in a way that you can just go through it step by step. And like I said, you can write in it and whatever. I'm going to try and get that into schools globally shortly.
Great. I think there's a hand.
Okay, just go ahead. I don't know.
Yeah.
Thabang, thank you. It's Margrethe Carlson here speaking. I have a million questions, so I'll probably keep everybody until next week. So I'll try and contain myself. But one of my questions, so the first one would be, in mimicking natural herd behavior, and you so correctly put it at the start of your talk that humans are part of the animal kingdom and we shouldn't see ourselves as separate from it. And though I'm not personally someone who could do hunting, just because of my nature, would hunting wildlife, grazing animals, antelope, by humans not also mimic natural behavior in herds? Because they, especially with elephants, where we are basically their only predator, would that not also contribute to mimicking their natural herding behavior?
Yeah, absolutely. But again, it's a very controversial subject. So until people understand all of this and the difference between ethical hunting and sort of unnatural hunting,
Yes.
it's again a delicate subject to talk about until people have a holistic context and understand. We've been talking quite a lot of, especially when it comes to elephants, because of course it's vital that they have their human predators because of exactly these reasons. We are an apex predator and we're behaving unnaturally as well. So we've got to mimic that natural behavior. And we have been talking about like pseudo hunts where you find a way to get people to effectively hunt the elephant, but not necessarily actually shoot it when you
kill
get
it.
there.
Yes.
Yeah. So
that would work for me.
yeah, look, I hate it as well, but in terms of the big picture, it's a
Yes.
natural thing, and if we can make it ethical, where it's not just, it's so unnatural now. We go for trophy animals, we go for all this thing, which is, we're not on foot. We're sitting in cars, high-powered rifles. We're going for the strongest. Naturally, we wouldn't go for the strongest animals. We'd be acting like predators and taking out the appropriate weaker things to make the stronger genes continue, etc. So yeah, you're 100% right. And we're going to have to find a way to broach that ethically.
And then another question that I had earlier on, just because I've been working on models for climate change, and they've never found the X factor for climate change because all their models keep diving into the gates. One of the things you mentioned earlier is this, that the decrease in plant coverage is actually contributing to climate change. And if you look at the, planet's history, there have been times where there were much higher CO2 concentrations than there are now. So would it be fair to say that, contrary to modern climate models where everything is attributed to the increase in CO2, that the increase in CO2 is actually because of a decrease in plant growth due to desertification rather than only the burning of fossil fuels that is, almost like you say, we tend to be very reductionist in our thinking. So could that be more related than we think or give credence to?
100%. I mean, everybody's talking about fossil fuels, and very few people are talking about global biodiversity loss, which it makes it's just common sense when you look at it in terms of how I put it out with the bare ground and taking the temperature of it and increase in droughts and floods and all of those things. So all of these things are contributing to climate change, but people are not talking about we believe now the biggest cause of climate changing, which is bare ground and biodiversity loss, which of course keeps everything healthy. So again, it's a very complex thing. But when it comes to the technological side of climate change, which is the fossil fuels, etc., we are going to be able to come up with better technologies because we are so technologically advanced. But when it comes to solving the biological side of it, our management has to change. And that's what people aren't talking about.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
I'll go for maybe another round while everybody else still processes. The livestock management tool, would that be something that in South Africa we could be able to implement even in the Kruger National Park, where there is massive biodiversity loss and it is attributed to elephant overpopulation, to the point where elephants are getting so desperate that they're killing trees by debarking them. So would it be possible, even taking into consideration the transfer of zoonotic diseases, to include livestock in the biodiversity management of a Kruger National Park, for example?
100%. You would have to look at it because, like we said, again, it's a controversial thing because of what we believe. We believe that these things are causing damage. But look, our place in Vic Falls, the Africa Centre for Holistic Management, we've run a livestock herd amongst the wildlife for 25 years and never had a problem. And also a lot, like I said earlier, a lot of these diseases are sort of slum condition diseases where it's based on biodiversity loss, and that's just what's thriving. So again, like the hunting comment, it's controversial just because of a lack of understanding and a lack of acceptance because of beliefs. But once people are ecologically literate, I love wildlife. I do this 100% because I'm so passionate about wildlife. And I'm more than happy to see our management herd of livestock regenerating that habitat so that the wildlife can thrive. And you know where they are at every second of every day. It's very meticulously planned, and everything is taken into consideration. So you can not see them, or you can see them if you want. You know what I mean? You can.
Yeah,
It's such
because
a and they're
no,
animals.
sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, carry on.
No, sorry. No, because this is the next thing that I found in a lot of arguments when it comes to wildlife management, and as the ecotourism side of it is, the Western tourists won't necessarily be very impressed if they see Bessie the cow next to an elephant in their photos. So that would have a massive, impact on their perception of the real wildlife versus their Disneyfied almost version of it.
Well, yeah, you can, if you were planning a livestock movement in those areas, you would say, well, there's photographic safaris going on. We don't really want them in the photos. But also, once people are ecologically literate, they won't have that negative attitude towards livestock. It's again just our beliefs that have created these negative things towards. And I would much rather see a herd of local livestock than a great big machine in an area, you know. And
Yes.
it's just, again, it's just mindset and ecological literacy. And if you look at our national parks, to be fair, our wild animals aren't really wild anymore either because of
Yeah.
all our reductionist decisions. So I mean, you'll have 50 cars going to one lion kill. These poor things have no privacy, they can't hide there. So it's kind of becoming like, you know, what's the difference between a cow and
Yes.
an elephant if they just stand next to you type thing. So again, it's just perspective and beliefs. And I've tried to write this book and set out this stuff so that by the time people hear about the tool of livestock, there's no backlash about it, because we have such firmly held beliefs that livestock cause damage. But well, hang on, we're also blaming elephants. So let's blame ourselves and use our natural resources and create the correct behavior with them. And unfortunately, we've just decimated wild herds so much that they just can't do the job.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Nobody? I think Carl or Thabang, are you there?
Yeah, listen,
Sorry.
Oh,
Sorry, Sarah, I just wanted to say thank you very, very much. I found the whole, this whole thing very, very interesting. And yeah, it's a lot to learn. And I really appreciate everything you're doing. Thank you.
thanks so much, Bronwyn. Yeah, like I said, this workbook that I've written, I'm teaching it as a subject, and I'll do courses where what we've heard in the last couple of days, it will take a bit longer than that normally.
I'm sure, but that'll be fun. I'm definitely going to look out for that book. Is
Great,
there
thank you.
also any chance that we could get a copy of the recording of these last 2 days or not?
Carl?
Carl? Carl, is it possible
Sorry, I
for
couldn't find my
us?
mute button. Yeah, well, I can make it available. It just depends if Sarah wants to send it out, but yes, I can do so.
Yeah, that's fine. And I have in the near future, because I've just received the book, in the near future, I'm going to be trying to record the contents into sort of an online course where it's in shorter sound bites type thing, so people can get it and do it in sections or in their own time, basically.
Great.
Thank
Thanks
you.
very much.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Sarah. So I just want to say thank you very much for your time and your knowledge that you've shared with us. Yeah,
Thank you for listening.
we've learned a lot. And to Carl also, our IT manager at the college, thanks for your time and helping us. It's not easy these days to work with this with these things, but we are slowly getting there, and it's really looking good. So, thanks very much, and for all the participants, and for taking time to spend this 4 hours with us in the past 2 days. We hope that next time when we do have this webinars and interactions, and people can still come and join us. So, thanks very much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for listening. Thanks, Thabang. Thank you, Carl.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. Cheers, man.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.